Welcome, everyone, and hello again from Los Angeles. Thank you for joining us today for what I believe will be yet another informative briefing. I'm especially excited because joining us today is newly appointed Chairman of the Federal Maritime Commission, Daniel Maffei. Before I introduce the Chairman, I'll offer a brief update on our April cargo volume, along with the latest on port operations and a look ahead. As always, we'll leave ample time to address your questions. So let's get started. April continues our record-setting streak for the Port of Los Angeles. In fact, we've set high water marks 6 of the last 9 months, and the other 3 months were darn close to new milestones. It's truly been an unprecedented run here in LA. What made it so unique is that the port handled more than 946,000 container units in the month of April. That's a 37% spike compared to last year, when global trade dropped with the onset of the pandemic. This was by far the busiest April in the port's 114-year history, outpacing the previous record set just back in 2019 by a hefty 29%. This marks the 9th consecutive month of year-on-year increases, following 11 straight months of declines. Remarkably, we continue to average 900,000 TEUs per month, dating all the way back to last July. 89 container vessels arrived in April, including 2 extra loaders, compared to only 76 last year. We averaged 16 container vessels per day at berth last month. Please remember, before the surge, our average was only about 10. 9 vessels were at anchor on April 30th, representing an additional 132,000 TEUs that'll be processed this month at the port. Let's take a look inside the numbers for April. Imports are not letting up with more than 490,000 TEUs. That's a 32% year-on-year increase. For perspective, we've only surpassed that import number twice before. In addition, the Consumer Confidence Index has increased 4 consecutive months. Americans are spending more and vaccinating. Stimulus checks are reaching households, and with all of this, businesses are reopening and 8.1 million jobs are now available. The Commerce Department reports that the economy expanded by a strong 1.6% in Q1, and an even stronger growth is projected for this quarter. Perhaps most telling, Amazon's Q1 sales spiked 44% compared to a year ago, while its profits rose an eye-popping 220%. Exports, however, continue to drag, with less than 115,000 TEUs on that side of the ledger, down 12%. Exports have now dropped 27 of the last 30 months here in Los Angeles. Finally, April's import-export ratio is almost 4.3 to 1, which unfortunately is the highest gap we've seen yet. And the scramble for empties continues, with over 342,000 empty container units repositioned back to Asia in April. That's just a few thousand TEUs shy of last month's all-time record. This is another reason why we are seeing such low export numbers today. Year to date, here's our report card. For the first 4 months, they've been off the charts. We've handled more than 3.5 million TEUs, a 42% increase compared to 2020. Also, looking at this versus a less volatile 2019, it's still an impressive increase of 20% volume growth. Shifting over to operations, key data points continue to trend in the right direction. We've seen as few as 13 container vessels at anchor in the San Pedro Bay over recent days. Today, specifically, there are 17 container vessels at anchor, with 8 of those headed here to LA. Another encouraging sign, fewer ships are going straight to the holding area. We've dropped from 90% in February to 65% of vessels heading straight to anchor in the month of April. Average wait time is now 6.7 days after peaking out at 7.9 days in March. These stats and others are updated daily at signal.portoptimizer.com. Now let's go down to the terminal tarmac, where our docks are continuing to hum with activity. Los Angeles marine terminal operators are still moving well above design capacity. Container dwell time on terminals checks in at 4.2 days compared to 5 days back in February, and street dwell time, those containers waiting for warehouse space, holds at 6.6 days for a 40-footer, similar to what we saw last month. Rail operations have improved, with April dwell time now standing at 8.9 days. You'll recall last month I reported that they peaked at nearly 11 days. And right now, all nodes of our supply chain are moving in the right direction as we process these record volumes. And as I mentioned at last week's ILWU Stop Work meetings, I'm so grateful to our dedicated labor force and the waterfront partners who work so hard to continue to improve our services. Now let's take an inside look at the next couple of months. The signal data on the screen shows continued stream of imports in the 3 weeks ahead. And based on the signal and our internal forecasting, import volume will likely remain very strong well into the summertime. We're forecasting May to come in at about 890,000 TEUs, which would be a projected 53% increase compared to last year. And our first June forecast is in at 840,000 TEUs, a lift of 21% year on year, if achieved. As I mentioned last month, the Port of Los Angeles is tracking to surpass 10 million TEUs when we close our fiscal year books on June 30th. 10 million is a goal that we've been chasing for a long time, and it requires a huge shout out to our stakeholders for bringing us to the doorstep of this historic milestone. Even with all this good news, we continue to monitor the reopening of our service sector to watch for signs of how it might impact retail and manufacturing business down the line. Before I welcome today's special guest, let me share just a bit of FMC Chairman Daniel Maffei's impressive background. A native of Syracuse, New York, Chairman Maffei is a former U.S. Congressman who also served as a senior advisor at the U.S. Department of Commerce. The chairman holds an undergraduate degree from Brown University and graduate degrees from both Columbia and Harvard. He was appointed to the FMC by President Barack Obama in 2016 and was just elevated to chairman by President Joe Biden on March 29th. As journalists, you'll be interested to know that Chairman Maffei served as press secretary for 2 United States senators, Daniel P. Moynihan from New York and New Jersey's own Bill Bradley, also known as number 24 of the 2-time champion New York Knicks. Chairman Maffei joins us from Washington, D.C. It's an honor to have you here with us, Chairman, and thank you so much for taking time.
No, my pleasure, particularly if you're going to mention 70 and 73 Knicks.
Outstanding. Perhaps we can start with an overview of the FMC for those who may not be familiar with the agency and its pivotal role that you play in the industry. What's the structure of the commission, its mission, and key responsibilities, sir?
We're a very small agency, but I like to think that we punch above our grade, because what we do is we monitor and regulate the commercial aspects of all ocean freight, international ocean freight in this country. To do that, we have 5 commissioners. All of the commissioners are independent. That's sort of like the Federal Election Commission or Securities and Exchange Commission. We're appointed by the president, but we don't serve at the president's pleasure like a member of cabinet would. And we have staggered terms. The president is allowed to appoint up to 3 members of, has been him, so his own party. But like I said, we still have 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats because we have staggered terms, and the president does get to select who the chair is. That said, though, speaking of Democrats and Republicans, we're about as nonpartisan as you can get as in terms of our actual operations. Yes, commissioners disagree, and we should, being independent commissioners, but rarely along any kind of party lines. And in fact, obviously there's going to be reports on the differences between me and my predecessor, Michael Corey, as chairman. But the truth is Mike and I agree on most things. I think he did a fantastic job of chairing the commission. It's just that, he was appointed 4 years ago by President Trump, replacing Mario Cordero, a good friend of yours, who's now at the Port of Long Beach. And now with President Biden, he's selected me. So that's the only real party difference is who's chair.
Great. Global trade and the importance of fluidity in the shipping industry is in the spotlight today, as we all know, and perhaps more than ever before. From where you sit, how do you see things today?
Global trade is the lifeblood of the world economy. Of course, it always has been. It's interesting. I'm a huge history fan, and you can go 3,000 years ago to the Indian Ocean and see global trade on the oceans and how important it was. And it is even more important today. Numbers are bet at about 95% of everything. That doesn't necessarily mean 95% of everything you see in front of you was necessarily all put together and put on a container ship, but probably most of the components were. Truly, it is most of everything that we use. It's essential to our economy, and that is one of the reasons why I think it is so important to have an independent regulator like the FMC. In terms of what's going on right now, I mean, you just described it in your remarks, and I was glad to hear some of the real good news. Not all good, but the real good news. The fact is that we have an incredibly vibrant global freight system, and right now that system is at and beyond capacity. And the fact, frankly, that ports such as the Port of LA and the Port of Long Beach have been able to handle it as well as you have been, I think is a real testament to the work that you've been doing, certainly the work that the employees and the members of ILWU and the management of the port's been doing, because I know that the capacity is just stretched beyond any historical limit.
Many of us are aware of the difficulties facing exporters, and I reported how exports have been down here for the better part of 2 years, and particularly in the ag industry, getting goods out of the country, reuniting trade partners. What is the FMC's view on this issue in your early days in the chair?
Well, it is interesting. You mentioned first you said that I had a very distinguished and impressive background, and then you said I had been a member of Congress for 2 terms, which, while true, I'm not sure if too many people would be impressed at that these days. That said, though, the district I was from is in New York, but not New York City. It was upstate New York State. And we had a lot of dairy farms. We had the largest apple producing county outside of Washington State, and soybeans. And so I really am in touch with these exporters and how frustrating it is right now, because the cost of a container has gone way up. The ability to get equipment has gone way down. And it's particularly frustrating now being at the FMC and hoping to help. And we have a pretty limited set of tools that we can use. We don't have anything that sort of says specifically help exports doing this, other than what our legislation says, which is to look to the market. But the market is currently giving us these very, very high prices for containers. So I do think it's one of those things that we have to continue to look at. The key thing that the FMC is doing is we've launched a investigation. It is a basically a fully comprehensive enforcement investigation led by our most experienced commissioner, Rebecca Dye, who I have full trust in. I've made sure as chair that she's gotten the full resources that she needs to get to the bottom of any abuse that might be happening that affects exporters. But I will say that's not enough. We need to do more for exporters. And 3 of the things that I plan on recommending to the commission, one is to have a go-to person for exporters here at the commission, possibly in our consumer response division, somebody who can help them figure out exactly what the law is and what, if anything, is being done wrongly on the other side. 2, even after fact finding 29, I think we need to do a continued enforcement continued enhanced enforcement where appropriate in the area of where exporters are denied containers, et cetera. As I say, there's many cases there won't be anything we can find that's unreasonable. It's just the market. But where is something unreasonable, we need to get to the bottom of that. And then 3rd, I'm going to recommend to the commission that at least take a good look at our detention and demurrage rule that we passed about a year ago, to see if there's any areas of it we can strengthen it specifically for exporters. And what I'm thinking about here is, these ERDs that have been moving around a great deal. Sometimes exporters will, send their containers to the port. The ERD will change. They'll end up getting their containers there. The particularly agricultural goods, might start to age, which is not good for many of them. And then to add insult to injury, they get charged detention and demurrage potentially on top of that. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at to try to help exporters. It is a huge priority of mine here at the Commission. And by the way, I believe a priority of the Biden administration as well.
On the subject of infrastructure that's being discussed in all corners of the country, including on Capitol Hill, the American Jobs Plan has a number of proposals in it, and it's being developed by Congress. From your viewpoint, what infrastructure does the nation's maritime system need at this point in time?
I think it needs a great deal. You're on the board of the American Association of Port Authorities, I believe, and you know how much of a struggle it has been these last. It wasn't just Trump. It goes long before Trump to get the kind of infrastructure money that you need. Even when I represented the little port of Oswego, in upstate New York, we really had to scrounge, myself and a Republican colleague of mine, the late Richard Hanna from next door. We really scrambled to get some improvement money. We shouldn't have to do that so much, not for these gateways that are really, again, 95% of everything where the global trade really happens. And plus, if we're going to increase exports, which I do believe we need to do, a lot of that has to do with infrastructure issues and the cost of getting the container from farmland in the interior to the ports and then on the ships. So, like I said, I think it is remarkable how well our ports have done, given the level of support that they've had. You've had to scrounge. Some states have really stepped in, et cetera. But whether we're talking, it doesn't matter where we're talking, the Northwest, whether we're talking the Gulf ports, the Southeast ports, New York, New Jersey has done a tremendous job, and of course the St. Pedro Bay and Oakland. So I think by and large ports are doing really, really well, but with not much, not the resources they need. One specific area that I hope that they invest in, and I believe that you are certainly going to be in agreement, is information infrastructure for our ports. If anything could have lessened the problems created by this huge import boom, it would have been to have information flowing more accurately, quicker, more freely. I mentioned the ERDs earlier. If people know when the ships are coming in, know when they're going to be loaded, if the delays can be worked in, if there was, if all of the lines and all of the ports and all of the terminals disclosed all this information that doesn't really have any commercial value. It's just good for the whole system. That's the one thing that really might have helped the system really keep up. So it's one of my major goals, and I believe that there is going to be funding in these bills, and I think both sides of the aisle realize that. So I'm very hopeful for that.
Great. And yeah, we've watched this very closely too. We know that there's $17 billion carved out for ports and waterways. But as you mentioned, there's also $100 billion carved out for digital infrastructure nationwide, broadband, et cetera. And if we could use a little bit of that on the industrial side to continue to carry out this information sharing concept, we're with you all the way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to, recommend again, we're independent. But I'm certainly going to recommend to my friends at the Department of Transportation to, wherever possible, not stovepipe these funds, because I have to tell you, like, if one question I'm asked is there enough for ports in there? Is there enough for ocean transportation? And my answer is, well, look, we always would like to see more, but look, it was mentioned also, given that it's not something that people necessarily encounter every day, they may see the results of our ports, but unless they live in LA or North Jersey or whatever, they probably don't see the cranes. Nonetheless, it doesn't matter. All the supply chain is interconnected. Putting a new bridge in Arkansas is going to help the whole supply chain, right? Because it includes all the warehouses, it includes the rail, the car, the roads, truck stops. I mean, things, we found this out during COVID, things we never thought were absolutely essential are truly absolutely essential. You can't just take one piece of the supply chain and take it out. So in that sense, what I really hope is just to have a little less stovepiping and more comprehensive thought about that so far what I've seen from Secretary Buttigieg, by the way, is right on. He seems to really get it. So I'm very, very hopeful, but it is complicated. And in government, everything is a bit stovepipe. So trying to break down those walls is always a key fight.
Well put, and thanks for that. Thanks for that commentary. At this time, let's turn it over to Philip and field some questions from the media in attendance today.
Very good. Thank you, Gene. First question, and before I start, if the media does have additional questions, please type them into the chat box, and as the screen states, please include your name and affiliation. First question is from Jeff Berman of Logistics Management for the chairman. Looking back at the Suez Canal situation with the Ever Given, how well are U.S. ports prepared, regardless of the waterway, in terms of risk management, had something like this occurred with inbound cargo to U.S. ports?
I mean, I think that to specifically answer the question, I think they're about as prepared as they could be, but I don't know how you would really prepare for that. It's going something like that. Well, even the way it was, even with the huge ship obviously wasn't coming to the United States; it was going to Europe. But it doesn't matter. There was still a bunch of some delays and ripple effects that did hit the United States and actually continued to do so just from the Suez Canal. So if it was a situation like the Panama Canal, for instance, that obviously would be a greater problem. I would say, though, that the resiliency of the ports is really, you don't necessarily see that in the day or two. Yeah, sure, everything is going to be a real problem in the day or two if you've got 3 or 4 or 5 large container ships trying to make call all at the same time. But it is in the weeks after that where what you want to see are longer gate hours. You want to see the ability of truckers to pick up the containers, that sort of thing. That is really where the recovery comes in. And again, I think our ports have been run about as well as they can be, given the kind of infrastructure they have, the footprints they have, the rail and road connections. I mean, it is a real challenge. Gene, of course, I know that in the San Pedro Bay, there were some issues with unloading the container ships, et cetera, COVID-related absences in the workforce. Finally, we've gotten people vaccinated and everything else, and the workforce is largely back, and the ships are being unloaded, and we have a shortage of intermodal containers. I think that's now being addressed. But the fact is that, again, the interconnectedness of it means that it's not simply a matter of a port being prepared. It's a matter of the entire system being prepared. And there's where I think we really need to work on it. Thank you for the question. Good question.
Thank you. Next question is for Gene, and perhaps the chairman may want to offer a thought as well. It's from Paul Page at the Wall Street Journal. What is container availability currently looking like for exporters, and are there backlogs with respect to inland distribution?
Yeah, 2 parts to this question, Paul, and thanks again for joining us as you normally do. It's very difficult because of this disconnection we have between import and export. As I've shared before, most of our imports go to major metropolitan areas where we live as consumers. Most of the nation's exports emanate from rural America, whether it be the ag sector, manufacturing broadly, even the automotive and tiered supply community. So trying to match that, round-trip economics are very important for those asset providers. Think of the shipping lines, the railroads, the marine terminals. You're sending an import to a location, you want to spin it back with a laden export. That's difficult. Then you get into a more complex discussion around triangulation. Can you move that container from Chicago with domestic cargo up to the Red River area of North Dakota, load that with agricultural products, get it back to the West Coast and onto Asia? So it's really a high wire act that we're trying to find here and threading a needle from 700 miles away. How do we connect these 2 important markets to make sure that we continue the velocity and the speed of these assets? As you could tell from our reports on the empty container repositioning back to Asia, there are plenty of containers. They're just not in the right location. So this is partly why I've asked to discuss and consider a nationwide port information sharing system that would give importers and exporters a view of ports, rail, truck services to align with the ocean shipping liner schedules and match which best path to take their goods. Without that, we're not looking at the situation with a clear lens, and we're going to continue to be where we're at today, repoing these empties back to Asia to get ready or pre-positioned for the next round of imports. Are there bottlenecks at inland locations? As reported to me by the Western railroads, the answer is yes. And it's the same conversation we've been having here at the port locations. We're encouraging and in some cases imploring our importers, pick up those containers, devan the product as quickly as you can, get those chassis and boxes back to the location, whether it be inland or at the coastal city. And as I've reported over the last couple of months, you've started to see those dwell times come down. We're gaining traction with this portion of our tactics. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that this is a perfect example of a topic that can't be answered in a soundbite, and that there are all sorts of differences. So, what Gene said is correct. I couldn't agree with him more about a port, a national port information system. And by the way, that's certainly not a Democratic thing, because Rebecca Dye has been advocating it for, I don't know, at least a decade now. So there's a lot that could be done, but it is different. I mean, containers that are exports, often our exports are heavier. So this idea that, wait a minute, ships come in and they may not leave with as many export containers. Well, they certainly could have more export containers than they're doing now. But the fact is that you couldn't have a one-for-one simply because of the weight differentials. Also, different exporters use different kinds of containers. Cotton exporters, for instance, mostly use the 40 feet, and they're doing okay in terms of container availability. Their problem is the reliability, is that they need to make sure that the cotton gets to the right market on time, because they're international competition. And that is a real problem, but it's far beyond any one port or something as simple as a container shortage. So it is a complex system, and certainly, I think more containers might be as part of the solution, but it's only very small part.
Thank you, Chairman. This question is addressed to you. It's from Eric Watkins at Lloyd's List. You had said this week that you're hopeful that the FF-29 investigation is starting to deter detention and demurrage practices that do not align with the FMC's interpretive rule. He's asking what gives you the confidence that the investigation is starting to deter such practices.
Yeah, I mean, Eric, it's a good question. As I sort of said in answer to a question earlier, I think good enforcement will lead to a good deterrent effect. We're too small an agency to expect that everything that goes wrong will automatically catch. But I think that if we, are making sure that enough of the time there is a real consequence, that we're going to stop and we're going to fine, or we're going to, bring perpetrators to court or what have you, that will be a real deterrent. I don't know. I think hope is the word I'm using. I think a deterrent effect is very difficult to sort of pin down, and particularly in real time. So I'm not, no, I don't have any data. I have, an anecdote here or there, but I wouldn't call that as evidence. But I do hope and believe it will create a deterrent effect, if not in the short run, in the long run. But I do think the key is what Fact Finding 29 is doing right now is really looking at the entire issue in LA, Long Beach, and in New York, looking at the detention demurrage practices. And I know they've collected just stacks of information and are going through it now. So I think it's I will say a hope, but a well-grounded hope.
Thank you. This question is for Gene. It's from Greg Holt at S&P Global. We've noted that vessel queues and waiting times at the Port of LA have declined, even as volumes have hit a new record. How has the port managed to increase its throughput?
Thanks, Greg. It's in large part to the folks I mentioned just about every month on this broadcast. It's the longshore men and women, the marine clerks, the foremen from the ILWU. It's the Los Angeles Marine Terminal operators, the Western Railroad's liner shipping companies, and our truck drivers, just to name a few. The broker and forwarder community has been integral in some of the advances that we've also made over the last weeks and months. But really, it was our outline of what we said needed to be done. When we hit a peak of ships at anchor in February totaling 40, we outlined 3 specific areas: short, intermediate, and long term. And in the short term, we said we had to get our workers vaccinated. And we've gotten a critical mass of longshore. We're working towards the warehouses, and the truck drivers. We've also gotten most, if not all, of our marine terminal operators and those who work right here at the port vaccinated. We said we had to speed up the velocity of containers, and that was that call to the import community to start picking up your boxes. If you had problems, if you were in a closed area, you couldn't get your trucks in, give us a call, send us a note, and they did. I've got an email box called askgene@portla.org, and with every webinar I participate in, every committee I speak with, and those in the shippers associations, we leave them with that information every time, and sure enough, we're getting emails with prioritized lists of containers, and we're hitting the ground running with our terminal operators. It's a triage situation every day, but it's that roll up your sleeves attitude that I think has started to get us some traction in this area. And I said we had to dig out of the backlog, and we have. We're down almost 2/3 on the number of ships at anchor, and we've got to keep hustling. Because before we know it, we're going to pivot really quick in August to our traditional peak season for back to school, fall fashion, and the all-important year-end holidays for our retail community. So we're going to keep chipping away. There are some structural issues that have to be addressed. The chassis model, the gate model of truck transactions, we're supposed to be doing about 60,000 truck moves a day, or about 2,000 an hour. We've got to get that down to a science, and digitization can get us there. And then longer term, it's all about competitiveness. We want to keep cargo flowing through this large gateway, but we've got to have policies, finances, and our operations all aligned together. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate you joining today.
He's got a quick follow-up. A few months back, you said you were working with shipping lines to divert some vessels to the Bay Area. Now vessel waiting times there appear to exceed those in the San Pedro Bay. Are any shipping lines currently being advised to divert from Los Angeles?
Yeah, what I said back a couple of months ago is we saw that pile of ships at Anchorage, totaling the number of 40 I just mentioned, was we were going to work with the industry to see if there was any movement of vessel strings that we could push to other ports who may have had additional capacity at that time. There were few takers. I believe Hapag-Lloyd adjusted some sailings, CMA moved a sailing to the PNW, and another expedited service to Oakland. But again, between the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, we'll move more than 18 million TEUs through this complex during 2021. And you look at the ports to the north of us, they're only a fraction of that capacity. So it's not realistic to say we're just going to start moving services. Folks coming back our way, the numbers continue to show, as we shared with you earlier in this broadcast, that the import numbers remain strong, and they will continue to do so. So it's our job to continue to free up space, have the cargo moving out the gates, and with some of the metrics that I watch daily and share with you all, I think we can continue to improve in those areas.
Thank you, Gene. This next question is for the chairman from Max at Port Technology. What action, if any, can be taken against the carrier alliances if the FMC investigation finds they have broken contracts with exporters and unlawfully contributed to West Coast or any congestion in recent months?
Well, so if a broken contract per se is actually not a matter that the Federal Maritime Commission does. Sometimes there's other things going on in addition to breaking the contract. But if it's just a broken contract, then that does have to go to standard courts, as any contract would, not us. In terms, though, of other kinds of things, if we find that exporters have not been treated fairly, have not been dealt with. In other words, that just ignored and not even offered a container at any price, discriminated against because of a particular kind of product or something like that. There are a number of different things we can do. And of course, if we find detention demurrage charges have been unfair or unreasonably levied, we can similar things. Usually, we have to do an investigation, and whether it actually goes to court or not is depends on how the process works and what the respondent decides. But we have the ability to levy fines, other kinds of civil penalties, and depending on what the violation is, those can be quite hefty. And also, of course, we can revoke licenses if it is if that is a kind of if it's the freight forwarder or something like that is doing something. I think the question mentioned carrier alliances, though, but we certainly can do that. We also, of course, can investigate the alliances themselves, and if necessary, even challenge them in court if we feel that that they are creating unreasonably higher costs because of their alliance. We have, though, looked into that pretty extensively and will continue to do so, but we've upped our monitoring of the alliances quite a bit. And so far, there's just not the evidence that forming an alliance, that the alliance structure itself or the alliances themselves are engaging in any behavior that would allow us to take them to court.
Thank you, Chairman. These next couple questions, two questions on a similar theme from Mark Zacconi at the Journal of Commerce and Dan Ronan at Transport Topics. I guess initially directed at Gene. Have the marine terminals made enough progress in digging themselves out so that they don't get overwhelmed by traditional peak season volumes just a few months ahead?
Well, that's the question at hand, Mark, and for Dan as well. Good to have you both back. Right now, we see a little bit of traction, as I mentioned. All of our metrics that we watch closely are coming down, moving in the right direction. But our marine terminal operators have been operating at above designed capacity for going on 9+ months now. As I've shared in the past, a marine terminal's footprint of acreage, if it's taken up by 80% of containers, that's usually considered full capacity in our industry. These guys and ladies have been operating at 90-95% capacity. And it looks a lot like the grocery store parking lot on the weekends. When all the parking spaces are full and somebody starts driving up and down the lanes and stopping, that's kind of what the container terminal looks like. That lack of maneuverability slows down the trucker from getting in and out, manufacturing a dual transaction, getting the trains separated and loaded up for on-dock rail. So I think they've done a tremendous job in keeping up with this wave of cargo. And also, please keep in mind that with ships at anchorage, once a vessel in port completes its work, departs and heads back out to Asia, 3 miles away is the next ship that's coming into that berth. We don't have time to groom the yards, get prepared with assets coming in, clean up everything, and then welcome that next ship. It's coming in concurrently after each departure. So the speed by which these folks are all working has been exemplary, yet we've still got more cargo to come in. And that's why I've said from early in the wintertime that our mark was going to be June 30th, and I upped that a little bit to about June 1st to say we needed to have few, if any, ships at anchor by that point in time so we can be prepared as we pivot into our traditional peak season. I like our chances right now, and I think we're going to keep chipping away to make sure that move to the peak season is what our customers expect of us.
Thank you. Chairman, this question is for you from Paul Avery at World Cargo News. If shipping lines set westbound rates for containers above what ag exporters are willing to pay and then move those containers back to Asia empty, is that a denial of service contrary to the U.S. Shipping Act?
I mean, details always matter on those things, but if you're asking, just at an isolated incident where if it's for economic reasons, unfortunately, I don't know of anything we can do per se at the commission under title under the Shipping Act. I'll just say, again, it's a high price in and itself is not a violation of the Shipping Act. And part of the thing is you said sort of willing to pay. Again, if it's not even offered, if there's no way for them to get a container, even if they were theoretically willing to pay for it, that might be a violation because it's a sort of refusal to deal. And that's why the details would matter a little bit with that question. But if it's simply a high price and it's offered and the exporters don't want to pay it for very good reasons, that is not in and itself a violation of the Shipping Act. No, and it is a good time. Like Gene asked me at the beginning, what does the FMC do? There's stuff that Congress does not give us any authority to do. We don't run the ports, obviously. We don't set rates, and we can't dictate the levels of the service that ocean carriers provide. What we can do is continue to monitor to make sure that the practices are being kept. And that the alliances don't, because of their existence, mean that there'll be a unreasonably diminished level of service or unreasonably increased cost. But when you've got it, and the key word that Gene said in the last answer was capacity. When you're at or beyond the capacity of the system, it's very difficult to sort of prove that that if only this didn't exist, then the prices would be lower. Because the fact is that it's simple supply and demand. If the demand is that high, then and the supply remains fairly limited, then that is what happens. So one thing I am doing, though, is I'm talking a lot to some of my former colleagues in Congress. And some of them have asked, well, could we change the Shipping Act? And of course, they can change the Shipping Act, and I will give them the best advice I can in terms of how they would and whether they should. But in terms of our current act, no, that a high price in itself is not a violation.
Thank you, Chairman. We've got about 5 or 6 minutes left, so and a bunch of questions, so we'll kind of do a lightning round and try to get to all these questions. This is from Gene Stas Margaronis, American Journal of Transportation. APM Terminals has installed infrastructure for electrified automated container handling equipment. How have those changes helped improve productivity there? And will more upgrades at the port containers be necessary along those lines?
Yeah, hi, Stas, and thanks for joining again this month. Good question. Of the 1,600 acres of container terminal property, the project that you mentioned is currently covering about 90 acres at the APMT facility. My understanding is that progress is being made, going from pilot to testing to now working real activity on container ships arriving and departing in container movement. So it's encouraging to see the progress there. The goal here is to increase productivity at all across the board in a safe environment for our workforce. And right now, we're probably averaging somewhere between 5,500 and 6,000 TEUs per acre across that entire patch in Los Angeles. Our goal is to one day reach that 10,000 TEUs per acre. And how can we be smarter about welcoming vessels in, get them worked, and headed back to Asia? What can we do about enhancing the gate turn times, like we've done with incentives on gate turns and dual transactions? Densifying on-dock rail, very important to us to get not only to our primary markets in the interior, but our secondary and tertiary cities, as opposed to draying to near and far dock rail yards. Managing that 1/3 of imports that goes to the IE a lot better than we do today is also part of it. So all of our work around the long-term strategic value is about improving efficiency and certainty for our customer. Great question, Stas. Thanks a bunch.
From Mark Laidman, S&P Global, some sources have said that increasing numbers of shippers are opting for the Pacific Northwest and the Gulf and the East Coast to avoid LA Long Beach during this import surge. Are there concerns about seeing long-term market share loss as a result?
Mark, market share is always a concern because it has a direct correlation to jobs creation for us. And the amount of revenue that we can drive here at the Port of Los Angeles by city charter and state titlelands trust requirements all get invested back in this port. So market share is very important. And over the past 20 years, we've lost 20% of our import market share here in the San Pedro Bay. And I have spoken wide and far about that subject and our need to be competitive. So with this snapshot in time, in fact, our market share numbers look pretty good. We monitor them on a regular basis as well. But yes, I'm always watching to get that competitive edge so we are the gateway of choice for our customers. Thanks for joining, Mark.
The last question has actually come in a couple of times, and it's regarding 24/7 operations at the port complex. There's been discussions about that in recent weeks. Any thoughts from Gene or the chairman on this?
Yeah, sure, Philip. I think in theory, 24/7 is very attractive. I worked overseas in Asia and the Middle East for about 11 years, and I've seen what those operations look like. A little bit different business model with a higher content of relay cargo. Ours is throughput and gateway driven. But in fact, today, on occasion, we operate a so-called hoot shift, which runs from 3 a.m. to 8 a.m., and it's not against the gates, but against the ship. So we can groom the yard and continue to work closely on manufacturing that hourly productivity that we want. But factoring in private sector labor costs and the complex logistics of getting all the supply chain partners together, it's challenging. Even our friend Jim McKenna from the PMA said that the hurdles around 24/7 are akin to solving world hunger. But we're working 9 shifts of work per week today. 5 during the day, Monday through Friday, and 4 at night, Monday through Thursday. Can we do more? I think the answer is yes. But we have to sync up and give confidence to our truck community, those in the Western railroads and our PHL short line, as well as the all-important warehouses, so we can match up schedules and make sure that when we have people on the job, that those entities know they can work with us and vice versa. But it's something the industry will continue to look at, work on, and see how we can improve our productivity overall. Great questions. Thank you.
I just will echo what Gene said about coordination, and this is true not just in the Port of LA or even San Pedro Bay, but every port I have seen. Expanded gate hours are usually a good thing, but they have to be done with coordination. You can't just, do an experiment, have night hours. Oh, no truckers show up. I guess we shouldn't have night hours. We don't need them. No, you have to work with the trucking community to figure out, and the BCOs and others, figure out what the needs are. Be willing to experiment a bit. I don't think there's any question that it may not be 24/7, but we're going to need extended gate hours in most of our major gateways in this country. Europe and Asia have them far more than us. So, this is one of the ways we're going to increase capacity of the system, but it does require more labor on the, and we want to make sure that the people who are investing in hiring that labor are able to see a return from that by having the business in the night and weekend hours.
Thank you, Chairman. That concludes the questions. I'll let Gene close out with you and perhaps add any closing remarks.
Well, what a treat. Chairman Maffei, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule today. And we talk on a regular basis, but giving your views to the media and those observers who watch our business so closely was really time well spent from our side. Can't thank you enough for joining.
No, absolutely, Gene. And I just hope that next time I can actually join you in person. It would be nice to get out there again instead of just be, stuck in Washington. So
we'll do just that when we're allowed to. Thank you, Chairman, and have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thanks. You too. Thanks again for the invitation.
You're welcome. Thank you. And in closing, I'd like to share some developments on our sustainability efforts. We've recently partnered with our neighbors at the Port of Long Beach on a biodiversity study. Done every 5 years, this is a comprehensive study of marine life and habitat in the nearly 9,000 acres of water at America's busiest port complex. The study shows aquatic life in the bay is thriving. We've identified more than 1,000 different species of birds, fish, invertebrates, algae, and marine mammals. Rare, threatened, or endangered species are increasingly abundant as water quality continues to improve. In fact, we now have the highest biodiversity to date at the San Pedro Bay Complex. Bottom line, we've come a long way since the 50s when studies showed degraded habitats and areas nearly devoid of marine life. Today, we're proud custodians of a vibrant, healthy harbor and the nation's #1 container port that supports people and jobs nationwide. Global trade and marine life not only can coexist, but are both flourishing right here at America's port. If you'd like to learn more, Philip Sandfield can put you in touch with our environmental team that's worked so hard on this project. Thank you again for joining us today, and until next time, stay safe and be well.